So, now it's time for our speaker. So, we listened to more tapes this year than we deserve to. And we heard so many amazing speakers. And the few that you've heard so far this week are the ones that have stood out. And Ted's really stood out for me. When I asked him, I sent him an email on a Friday saying, could you, asking him to come down here and be a part of our Roundup and do this. And I hadn't heard from him by Monday, and I was getting a little nervous, like maybe it went to his junk mail or something. So I gave him a phone call, and I said, this is David from the Florida Roundup, and I was hoping that you would to come down and speak for us. And he said, yeah, I got your email, and I've had the weekend to think about it. And my first response was I wanted to say no, but my sponsor told me to say yes. So the answer is yes. And it's that simple. The program for him is just that simple, and I love that. And so without further ado, Ted from San Francisco.
My name is Ted. I'm an alcoholic. Wow. Really glad to be here. I want to thank the committee that put this whole thing on. I've had a great weekend here, as I hope all of you have. It's been wonderful. I'm out of my comfort zone. That's a good thing. And really glad to be here. And I want to thank my sister for coming out here. This is her. She celebrated 3 years, February 3rd. And my two friends from Hawaii that are here, Kunani and Steve, I want to thank you for coming along to support me. I've been going to the Hawaii Roundup every year for about 10 or 15 years, and I met Kunani there. Steve, I've been sponsoring for the last 25 years. I met him at his third AA meeting, and it's kind of awkward. He's probably heard my share more than anybody else in the world, and yet he still comes to support me at these events, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Wow, there's so many things. I went to pray in the bathroom before this, and someone left their sunglasses and a rock star in the back of the toilet, just so you know. I thought it was my gift. God answers the prayers real fast. So it's true. I was taught in Alcoholics Anonymous to say yes, and then figure out how you're going to do it. So when I was talking to David on the phone, I said yes, and I thought I said it a little quickly, and he said it's a Florida Roundup, and I said, where is that? And and he said it's Miami, and I had a lot of prejudgments that I won't go into. But I have a lot of opinions, and I try to share my experience from just my experience, strength and hope. And so in my share, some of the opinions come out, but they change so rapidly these days that I'm not really attached to them. So if they upset you, don't worry about it. It'll change later. It's a program of action and change. And it's changed so much for me over the last 27 years. My sobriety date is 1/1/85. I got sober in San Francisco. I'm so glad I can make some eye contact with Jacqueline and Tammy out there. That's very supportive. So my home group is the Tiburon Stag. They meet at 6 o'clock for a step study and 8 o'clock for a speaker discussion. It's a mainstream meeting, what I call mainstream. It's a mixed meeting. Well, it's mixed now that I'm there. But I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm I'm an alcoholic. I started drinking at age 15 in the 60s in Lawton, Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I was the only queer person I knew. I should have looked around my house a little closer. I have 2 gay brothers and a gay sister. So I grew up on a military base. Fort Sill is the military base. My father was a sergeant in the Army, and might be my attraction to military uniform came from there. But thank God I didn't end up in a habit, because I went to Catholic school. And so the messages I got as a kid, a young gay boy in Oklahoma, was my messages from the military and the Catholic school and the nuns was that it was not okay to be me. And I've dealt with that my whole sobriety, my whole life. So what happened, I started drinking at age 15. I have 2 older brothers. They dragged me out, gave me a Coors 16-ounce beer at a party. I was always full of fear and uncomfortable around people. I drank that beer, and it was the magic that I was looking for. It lessened the fear. I felt more confident and able to not exactly come out and be myself, but I felt I could say anything I wanted, and I had a lot of anger to express. So I quickly started overindulging in alcohol, and my brother, who had been dragging me out of the house, trying to get me to socialize with his friends, was quickly taking me out of the parties and asking me not to be so crazy. When I drank, I wasn't like other people. I couldn't control the amount that I drank or the way I behaved. I lost a lot of inhibitions when I drank. So for the new members, we don't really call out the new members here. I haven't seen it, but welcome. That's the reason I'm here today, is to carry a message to the new members. I'm assuming a lot of people, there's a lot of time here. I was quite impressed at the countdown last night. Really impressed with the whole diversity of this Roundup. It's really great. But for the new people, my definition of alcoholism is I lost the ability to control my drinking. I know that a lot of people that are really into the book, they use the definition. They have an allergy of the body and an obsession of the mind, and that's in the doctor's opinion, and they like the effect of alcohol, and that's the information that you get out of doctor's opinion. But I hadn't read the doctor's opinion before I came to AA. I just knew something was terribly wrong, and that something was that I couldn't stop drinking. I was drinking alcoholically in high school. I was in Lawton, and I drank my way out of Cameron Agricultural College because in the first semester, after graduating from Eisenhower High School, I went to Cameron Agricultural College, and ROTC was a requirement. Well, I was a budding hippie. I did not want to be in the system. I was a hippie wannabe, and I was protesting. I think we were protesting the war, the Vietnam War. And so I dropped out of college because I wouldn't wear the uniform in ROTC, and I got a draft notice. I mean, I couldn't believe it. My 2 brothers had gone in the service. My older brother was drafted, and then my other brother, not the smartest one in the family, joined the military and the Marines to get out of the draft. Didn't make sense to me, but I didn't follow his example. I just could not believe that they would want all 3 of us. I couldn't see how that could help any war effort. And so I always say I just found myself, I got drafted. My lottery number, they had drafted men by the lottery number, and the only time I ever won anything, my number was 53. And I was like, oh no. I mean, they were going up to 200, I think. And I got drafted. I was just out of high school. I was almost 19 when I got drafted, and I went to the Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. They shaved my head. They gave me a rifle and put me in fatigues, and I was in the Army. And they were going to make a man out of me. What a job. And I thought they were really scraping the bottom of the barrel. I had an alcoholic personality fully developed even at that age, and I was 19 years old. I was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and my attitude was, what are you going to do? Draft me? And they would say, drop down and give me 20, and I would lay down and just lay there. And they would yell and scream and hit me with the rifle butt, and I thought, they will get tired of doing that before I do a push-up. You know, I was not into that. They were doing I call them jungle gyms. I don't know what they really call them, but on the obstacle course, and I got blisters on my hands. And so when they were yelling at me to go on the jungle gyms, I was like, I can't do that. I have blisters on my hands. And there was a big wall, and these guys would look at the wall, and this is just the alcoholic part. I'm trying to show you how my alcoholic defiance was in full bloom. They had a big obstacle course in the wall, this big wall, and all the guys were just showing off their testosterone and jumping and grunting and groaning and screaming at themselves, and they just charge that wall and claw their way over it. And I'm like, oh no, and they'd line up and do this, and they just one right after the other, and claw, and I saw a path around the side. and I thought, hey guys, right over here. You know, I was looking for the easier, softer way, and right there. It was so easy. And so I got in trouble. I ended up after a few weeks, I don't know if any of you have been in the military, but I ended up in a holding situation. It was called the zoo for people that weren't quite adjusting. And it was really scary. It was people that were trying suicide and overdoses to try to get out of going to Vietnam. And I really wasn't so afraid of Vietnam, but I was terrified of being found out that I was gay. So they put me in this, I was injured in a situation, and I won't go into that because it's a long story. Well, I'll tell it because I've got more time. So they put us in a big circle, about 200 men, and they had Pugo sticks, and they put a little helmet on you with these sticks with cotton balls on the end, and they point at you, and each guy gets in, and they send in two guys, and they jump up and down, they go, kill, kill, kill. And I started laughing. I thought, no way, you know, I'm not going to jump up and down and do that. And so they beat me up with that stick. And then I thought, okay, I just lay down real quick. And so I get up. My turn's over. Thanks a lot. And I get up to Prince out of the circle. And he says, you're staying in the center of the circle. And then he started, one man after another, they started sending other men in to teach. He said I was going to stay in the center of that circle until I learned how to fight. And I thought, oh my God. It didn't happen. I got injured, and they dislocated my shoulder, and a string of profanity came out of me. I'm going to try not to use too much profanity from the podium, but at that time, I just was livid. I had been bottling up all this rage and anger, and the next thing I know, they were shaking me by the scruff of my shirt in the air. My feet were like that far off the ground, and they're yelling, you can't talk to the captain that way. Then I told them, why not? You know, I just told them what I thought. And then I was yelling, my arm is broken, because I thought it was. So they put me in this zoo place. I walked in, and there was a guy on a bunk bed and a guy on the bottom bunk. And the guy on the bottom bunk had his leg out, and the guy on the top bunk jumped on his leg. And that was my introduction. And then he wanted to get out of the service, so he was doing that. So I took the sling off of my arm. Another trait of mine is that I lie. And I took the sling off of my arm. I went into the captain and the sergeant of that company and said that I had been prejudiced against and that there was nothing wrong with my arm, that it was a mistake, and I needed to get out of this situation as quickly as possible. They made me barracks guard for a week, and I was graduated with a different company. And this is when I should have recognized a God in my life, but I didn't for the next 10 years. The company I was in initially, they all went to Vietnam. And the company that I was put into for that last week of basic training, stateside. And my orders were for the Presidio of San Francisco. Wow. I should have just got down and thanked God right then. I did not know that this was God's plan for me. I will say when I did the third step with my sponsor and I said and offered myself to God to do with as He would, my will and my life over to God and do with me as He will, I had no idea this is how it would be used, that this is where I would end up. But it's just an amazing miracle of God's grace in my life. But that was the first evidence of it. I drove my VW Bug from Lawton, Oklahoma to the San Francisco to the Presidio. I was on Lombard Street. I was high. I couldn't find the left turn into the Presidio. I went across the Golden Gate Bridge. I turned around. I went back down Lombard. I couldn't find that. I just checked into a hotel and got a case of beer and said, I'll check in tomorrow, like I'm going to a resort. I'm just like, I'll just check in later. And it's the Army. They really want you to show up. They told me I was a disgrace to the uniform. So I didn't have to wear one after. I slept in my uniform. I was nervous. I was always very nervous. And I don't know why I thought it would help if I slept in my uniform, but I was always ready to go. That's what I thought. Like if something happens, I'm ready. If a war breaks out, I'm there. So anyway, it was in a barrack situation. I just drank myself every day. I was a medical records clerk at Letterman Hospital, and they got so tired of my acting out, they put me on the shift at 6 p.m. until whenever I could do the job. So I would go in civilian clothes into the hospital and put the records wherever I wanted and leave and go drink. And then my last duty assignment there was to locate missing records. So it's like a payback, sort of kind of an amends. So I got out of the Army in 1973, and I moved into Noe Valley in San Francisco with 3 straight guys. I mean, I was really confused. I still wasn't really coming out. I lived in this house for 3 years with these guys. It was a frat house situation, 3 dropouts from Catholic college. They were Catholic kids, guys. So they were just like all the Catholic boys I knew. They talked about women all the time but never did anything. And so it was really easy to hide out with them. I mean, they all like, if I had a girlfriend, this is what I'd do. And, that's what they played dominoes and poker and every night. And we had a kitchen table that was filled with marijuana. I have a sponsee. He just thinks it's weird. I call it marijuana. And that we were supposed to sell lids of grass and roll it and clean it and sell it, but nobody ever did. It just, if you want a joint, go to the kitchen. Or if you want to, you go to our house and get it, but nobody would just clean it and sell it. Like that was the plan to make some money. But a bunch of alcoholics, nobody got around to it. And it just sat, we used it as we could. And I mean, it was like a frat house, crushed the beer cans. And my hiding, my gayness at that time was to be really unkempt and sloppy and hide out with these guys and drink a lot and talk trash. So I lived there for 3 years. I was drinking. I came out. I started hiding men behind my bedroom door. And I remember I bought a water bed, which was really crazy. It's not good for orgies. Because, people bounce off. They're just like, it was a bad idea. So we busted it up and used it for firewood. And we actually, all the furniture in that house ended up for firewood. Because, familiar, huh? So I moved in with a woman to fix things. And it was my best friend in the Army, had a wife. And she became my drinking partner. And she left her husband and her 1-year-old and moved in with me in the Potrero Hill. And as soon as we got an apartment together, I told her I was gay and locked the bedroom door. It was like really another amends I had to make later. And I started dating the drag queen upstairs. So my drinking, I'll tell you real brief, my drinking went from 1970 in San Francisco to 1980. I was at City College for from 1973 to 1984. So, is City College a 2-year junior college? It's a great way to meet people. We started the Gay Student Union in 1974 at City College, and we had the business meetings at my house. I had run off those 3 straight guys and had moved in Monica with me, and then we had then after she was fed up with me, we had the business meetings at my house. So we had the back room had a mattress in it, and that was where the guys discussed business. And we had the front room where the lesbians would meet and talk the politics of the gay community center at City College. And I, at the time, we're drinking Red Mountain wine in the big jugs, and I would run back and forth from the back room to the front room. And I thought, this is the way to live. You know, I can get along with both groups. I'm really adaptable. I drank alcoholically in San Francisco in the Castro initially. I was in the Castro in the early 70s, and then I drank in the Haight. I moved into the Haight. A lot of terrible stuff happened, and I ended up in the Haight. One time I had rented one apartment. I left Monica and had rented another apartment, and I was staying with a couple friends of mine at 17th and Castro because they were there, that's why. And it just seemed so convenient. And then finally my friend said, Ted, you're renting 2 apartments. Why don't you go live at one of them? Pick one. just go either live in the Haight or Potrero Hill, but you can't live here anymore. And so I went to live in the Haight, and the last part of the 70s, I spent my time on Haight Street. If you go to Haight Street right now, it hasn't changed very much. There's a lot of kids hanging out there. It's just doing the same thing. Where's the next party? Do you have anything? Are you holding anything? Can I get anything? I considered Haight Street my living room. I lived on Page Street in a studio apartment for $140 a month. I worked temp jobs in San Francisco, and I went to City College, and I was out there until 1980. So the part about controlling my drinking, the last 3 years of the 70s, I tried to control my drinking. I really did try to control it, and that's what makes me an alcoholic. I could not stop. I joined a men's yoga class. I joined a meditation group. I joined a gym. I became a jogger. And I used to jog with the Lavender U. They changed their name to the Front Runners. But I would be so hungover jogging with that group. I was trying to control my drinking, but I inevitably ended up at 2 a.m. in one of the Castro Street bars, Gus's Pub, Tracks, Deluxe, Question Marks, Theater Club, one of those dives. I would be in there at 2 a.m. arguing with the bartender when they put the lights on and they said, last call. I'm the guy that says, the clock's wrong. You know, my watch isn't the same as yours. So after 3 years of trying to control my drinking, I finally surrendered a bit of it, the disease, and I went to 18th Street Services in the Castro, which was a recovery program for men in the Castro. It would meet 3 nights a week, 3 hours a night. And I went to that in 1980. And so my first sobriety date was June 10th, AA's birthday, June 10th, 1980. And I went to this recovery program, and I went to this group, and I just was really angry. They would go around and say, how you doing, in a little sort of a therapy group. And I would say, I hate all of you, as Jacqueline says. I hated everybody. I hated myself. I told them, I hate you. I don't want to be here. I hate not drinking. I think it's boring. And they go, oh, thank you. Keep coming back. You're so honest. And I'm like, really? It seemed like the more abuse I gave them, the more they took, so I got more abusive. I was in that group for 3 months. At the end of that, Bill B., the counselor, said to me, Ted, what's your plan to stay sober? And I said, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And he said, what's that? And I said, I go to the I-Beam every night and dance. And now I don't dance with people that bump into me because I'm not drinking, and it's really irritating when people bump into me. So I dance up on the stage there. I mean, I said, the big change in my life was I wasn't going to let people bump into me anymore. And I was going to dance on the stage and get away from people because my problem was you and how you kept getting in my business. So I went, and then he said that plan probably won't work. But there's a living sober dance in 1980. He said there's a sober dance, and he's a good counselor. He knew men like me that had that kind of attitude, telling me 90 meetings in 90 days or find a God that's going to keep you sober. I was interested in two things. One of them was dancing. So he said they're having a dance it was at Fort Mason in 1980, and it was one of those big hangars out there, and they had decorated it with white parachutes and big flower arrangements. This was very gay, and I loved it. I walked in there. They had a big disco ball. I was at home. As long as there's a disco ball and loud music, I was good. And I picked up a newcomer. I think he had 24 hours. I started that process, and but I had learned 3 months of alcohol education in the 18th Street services, so I went with this guy. I remember vaguely we were slam dancing, nobody else was, but something going on with that? Thank you. Oh, no. Okay. Hi. How are you? Thanks. Okay. So I went home with this guy. I dumped out all his alcohol and told him what I knew about AA. Nothing. I knew that they put on a pretty good dance. I started 4 years of going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I went to Trinity. I heard we talked about it today. At the table, I met a guy from San Francisco, and I went to Trinity. I went to Fell Street, One-Liners. I went to, in the Castro, they won, I don't know, there's a bad name for it, I won't say. I went to Show of Shows, which was not really, it was Wednesday discussion. So I went to the gay meetings. I found out later my nickname was the Pointer Sisters, because my friend Mark and I were just talking about people and pointing at them all the time. And so, you know, my behavior didn't change. I took bar behavior and brought it into the rooms, and I didn't have any other clue what I was doing. I found out later, it says in the big book, I was dominated by cynicism and sarcasm, and because I was a children of alcoholic, it says children of alcoholics are sometimes dominated by cynicism and hardness, and it takes them a long time to forgive and forget. And seeing for them is believing. So I used to put down the 4 years I didn't do the steps, but what I was doing, I was watching Alcoholics Anonymous. I was watching the people in AA and just seeing what was true and what wasn't. I came from a very dysfunctional family of alcoholics, and I really wasn't sure what was true and what was false. So I was watching, and I was behaving just like I was in a bar in the AA rooms. I went to the meetings. I heard about 13-stepping. I heard this guy stay away from. He's a 13-stepper, Larry S., and so I was sitting next to him every meeting. I volunteered to help him set up chairs at Fell Street. I told him I jogged much further than I did because he told me how far he jogged, and I said, I do that. And I ended up at his house early in the morning to meet him for a jogging date, and the same newcomer that was in the meeting the night before came out of his bedroom. And I thought, damn, how'd he work that out? Because how'd he get past me? That's what I couldn't figure. So that guy, I mean, that's all I was interested in for many years. I got into, at City College, I'd been doing nursing prereqs for many years, and finally, sober in 1980, I got accepted into nursing school, and I got accepted into state or city. I went to city because it was a short program. 2 more years, I could be an RN, and I started working as a psych tech at San Francisco General, And my goal was to be a psych nurse. So crazy as I was, believe it or not, I was dating a guy, and I said, what's your job? And he said, I'm a psych tech. And I said, oh, I'd like to do that. And he said, I don't think you could do that. And I said, why not? And he said, you're too crazy. And so that was a challenge in my mind. I said, I'm going to do that. And so I became a psych tech, LVN, and then I got accepted into nursing school. So for the 4 years from 80 to 84, my goal was to get in the best shape that I could possibly do, to get through RN program and get a job at General, working, making good money, taking long vacations, and having this fabulous life. That was my goal. I told you I had not changed my bar standards at all. I was still looking around in the room, see who was sleeping with who was wearing what, how did I look tonight, starving myself to death. I joined Weight Watchers and AA at the same time. I thought it was the same kind of program, except they never mentioned God once. So go figure. So I did AA that way. I made fun of speakers. I made fun of the big book. I made fun of cliches. I made fun of the people that had sponsees, and they followed them around. And I thought, oh, how sad for them. They have the only way they can get friends is to have sponsees. And there was this older man, Skip B, who they've named the recovery house after. And in my twisted mind, every newcomer he brought to the meeting, I thought he was sleeping with them. And I thought, how does that work? So I hung around AA because I wanted some of what he had, which was all those newcomers that I didn't know he was working the steps with them from a recovery program. So what happened, one of my defects of character, and in God's hands, my defects have become assets. And what happened was I had a friend in nursing school who was a big book thumper and was sponsoring women. And she asked me to go to a meeting with her. And the purpose of going to the meeting was to give dirty looks to the guy that was speaking. I could do that. That was like, oh, dirty looks, I can go. And I usually sit in the back of the room so I could see everybody and talk about everybody. But she said, let's sit up front close so we can give him dirty looks. Because he was 14 years sober, and he just moved to San Francisco, and he was dating one of her sponsees with 7 months. And so everybody was really upset. That's the kind of stuff I was interested in AA. You know, like I heard a woman say once the traditions and steps look like pool rules, and nobody ever read those. And it's like, yeah, I'm not reading those. So, when I was kind of sarcastic, and somebody said, have you read this? And I said, I'm waiting for the movie. I had not read the big book, but when she said, you want to go give this guy dirty looks? Oh, yeah, that sounds like a great idea. So we went up to this meeting at 1010 Valencia, and we sat right up front, and I gave him the best dirty looks I could, and amazing thing happened. I forgot what I was there for. I forgot that I was there to stay myself and not change. And he talked about the steps, and he said, the answer to all your problems are in this book. And I'm thinking, I've got problems that aren't in that book. I wouldn't know. I'd never read it. But I didn't think they would talk about a quite promiscuous gay man from 1970 to 1980 that lived his life really promiscuously and spent a lot of time in Buena Vista Park. I said, people say, where were you on the weekend? I said, camping. And it was kind of like camping. So I didn't think that story would be in here. So but he talked, and he had an English accent, and he was 14 years sober, and he just was amazing. He was very arrogant and English, and I was, so I become very Irish. Because he was English. I don't know why. I had a lot of principles unexamined. And what happened was he got my attention, and he made me really angry. And that was always, in God's hands, that can be an asset for me. And I had not shared, I came into AA with a boyfriend, even though I was chasing after Larry S. I had a boyfriend, and he's got his 1-year chip, and at the corner of 18th and Castro, after we picked up our 1-year chip at Show of Shows, he said to me, okay, let's go drink. We did it. And as far as I know, he's still out there. He told me he would never come back to AA as long as I'm in it. So I guess he's not in. So this guy got my attention, and I raised my hand. So I didn't ever share in an AA meeting because it sure shows. I did raise my hand once, and the guy I was with, he said, "Ted, you made a fool of yourself, and your voice cracked, and you don't make any sense, and you laugh too much, and nobody likes you." Wow. So I didn't share for 4 years. But this guy pissed me off, so I raised my hand, and I said, "I haven't done the steps, and I haven't read the book, and I have 4.5 years sober." And he said to me, "You're on borrowed time. You're going to drink again." And I thought to myself, no crosstalk. So, he's a cross-talking 13-stepper, So we were going to try to figure out how to, let's look at those traditions and see if we can get him out of AA. Because, he's obviously not doing anybody any good. So I went, Gene and Susan said, "Why don't you talk to him at the end of the meeting?" And I went up to him and he said, I said something, and he said, "Why don't you join AA?" And I said, "Didn't you hear me? I've been going to AA for 4 years. And he said, "Yeah, I heard you." But I said, "Why don't you join AA?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Why don't you've been a visitor for a long time. Why don't you join? We love visitors, but why don't you join us?" Man, I had never had anyone talk to me like that. And so he said, "Here's my card. Call me tomorrow." And that was the beginning of my recovery. So that was in 1984, the last of 84. I called that man the next day. He said, "Get out your big book, turn to page 63, and we're going to do the third step prayer on the phone." And my stomach just sunk. I thought something's going to happen. I didn't know what, but I did not want to read the prayer. I did not want to talk about God, but I did call this guy, and I think God works in my life that way often without my really fully aware of what's going to happen. So we did the third step prayer. I told him where I went to meetings on Guerrero Street at high noon. I had moved into the mission by then. And he started what I called stalking. He started stalking me. I should have never told him where I went to meetings because he was enthusiastic about rescuing me. And he was at that meeting every day, and he gave me 1 month to do my fourth step. And then when I went out to, I will say this, he'd say, open the book to page 64. And he'd say, "Read it." And I read it, and he said, "What did it say?" And I didn't know I was going to be quizzed. And what did it say? And I read it again, and he said, "What did it say on page 64? And when I'm quizzed like that, I can't think. I just graduated from nursing school, and I could not. What do you want? Is it going to be on the test? It's like he said, "There's a direction on page 64. Can you see it?" I couldn't see it. And he said, "Right here, we made a list. Do you know what a list is?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Okay, I want you to make a list of people, institutions, and principles that you're angry." And that became my fourth step process, was going back to him and saying, "I'm finished." He said, "No, there's another part, and another part." And after a month, I went out to Daly City on the BART, going to any lengths. And I was bargaining with myself. If he's a he is a womanizer. And he says, I was thinking, if he says anything about this attractive woman coming down the street, I'm not going to do my fifth step with him. I can't possibly. And sure enough, he goes, "Oh, wow, look at her." And he's always commenting on women's anatomy. And I was like, this guy is such a jerk. And I went to his house, and we knelt down, and we did the third step prayer. And then he said, "Tell me why you haven't done a fourth step in 4 years." Start off. I said, "Well, I have this stuff written." He goes, "No, I don't care. We'll get into that. But tell me why you haven't done a fourth step." And I said, "Well, because it says now about sex. And I've been living quite promiscuously from 1970 to 1980, and I'm ashamed of myself and the way I behaved." And he said, and I needed alcohol to cope with that shame. And he said, "Your sex powers are God-given and therefore good. I want you to start enjoying your sex life." He said, "You've been loathing and despising your sexual behavior. I want you to start enjoying your sex life. I want you to put an empty chair next to the bed and invite God in to watch the show." I was like, really? Wow, that doesn't seem right. Wow. The other thing, and I just thought I'd say this to see how she signs it. He says, I don't care where you put your cock, whether you fuck chickens or dogs. Chickens or dogs? Chickens or dogs? And I got all indignant. I said, I haven't. And I thought, he doesn't know what a homosexual is. But anyway, I did my sex inventory with him. And before that, though, he told me about his sex life, 14 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he put me at ease. That guy was very active. And he said, I don't care what position you play or what side you play on, as long as you get off the bench and play. And nobody had ever talked to me that way before. And I was really, from that moment on, I was in AA. He said there's no AA police and there's no AA vice squad. And you can do anything you want in Alcoholics Anonymous as long as you're willing to pay the consequences. And that was a great principle to live on initially. But I want to tell you how my defects of character grabbed a hold of me and took that, and I almost lost my sobriety over it more than once. And I completely changed. What happened was I did my steps with him that night, the fifth step. But as I was leaving, I thought I was really relieved to be out of there. I really was happy to be headed home and take the book down from the shelf and do the hour and get on with the steps. And he said, tell me what you don't want to tell anyone. And I just told him just about everything. But he said, tell me what you don't want to tell him. And there was one thing that I didn't want to tell him. And I said, well, I've heard a lot of people in gay AA, and they say clean and sober. And I am sober for 4.5 years. But I did poppers in a sexual situation 2 months ago. And he said, what are poppers? And I said, oh, nothing. Because if I see a loophole or a chance to wiggle out of it, after I see his reaction that it's not going to be good, then I started to think of a lie. And he said, is it a drug? And I said, I don't think it is. And he said, what is it? And I said, I have no idea. I said, I don't know, locker room. I don't know what really it is. And he goes, well, what does it change your mind about what you're doing when you're doing it? And I said, oh, yeah. He said, I think it's a drug. He said, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan. And he got very excited. He'd been almost falling asleep during my long four-step. And he got really excited, like he's discovered gold. He says, this is it. This is the plan. You're going to go back to all the regular meetings, go back to the show of shows, and go back to the high noon. And you're going to sit up in the ICU, the intensive care. I know it's an old joke, but it was a first time for me, as everything that he said to me, I didn't know it came out of the book. I thought he was the smartest man I ever met. If you read the book, you can make people think you're smart for a minute. Until they read the book. And then they go. Then as I said to my sponsor, you're nothing but a parrot. So he said, I want you to go back to them, sit in the ICU, get out of the half-measure section in the back, and sit up front, and raise your hand and change your sobriety date. Start over. Wow. I wasn't expecting that. He said, you're not even sober. And I was really totally surprised. And he said many things to me that I still remember. As I heard a guy in one of the workshops say, the things I learned in early recovery still are the best advice I ever got. He told me, don't take a public opinion poll in AA. That's what keeps you so sick. Because you know you have a knack for finding the sickest people in the room, run your idea by them, and they agree with you, and you both stay sick. He said, so you have a sponsor for that very reason. I care more about your sobriety than I care what you think of me, and I'm the one person in Alcoholics Anonymous that will tell you the truth. He said, I know you're lying because your lips are moving. And which I hated that, but I didn't think so. I thought, I'm the most honest person I know. I don't know that many people. But at that time, and he said, I know you're lying because your lips are moving, and you lie when to tell the truth would be better for you. So I went home and cried all night because that was the first time my ego had really taken a puncture and had deflated. And I cried all night, really didn't know how I was going to face the men at the show of shows or the Castro or Trinity. The ego was really bruised. And I called Gene and Susan, and they said, fire him. And I knew that taking a public opinion poll was not a good idea. He's still my sponsor today. I'm 27 years clean and sober. He told me always say yes to Alcoholics Anonymous requests and then figure out how to do it. And it's just, that was 27 years ago. I mean, the adventure that I've been on has been quite great. It's been a lot of pain and a lot of joy, but I don't think you can have one without the other. But I will talk about how my defects of character almost lost my sobriety over and over again. I was seeing a married guy, a straight married guy, not so straight, but that's, so I was seeing him for 3 years in a bad relationship, and when I tested, so I didn't want to get tested because I was an RN working in the hospital, and I thought the jungle drums at that time were that if you became positive, you would lose your teaching or your RN, and I was terrified of that. I'd worked so hard to get it in so long that I didn't want to lose it. And I was having a house meeting with my sponsees at my house, and we do fact-finding, fact-facing in the fourth step, and we were at the fourth step, and I'm always fact-finding, fact-facing, and they confronted me, as sponsees will do often. And they said, Ted, you're not really facing the facts. You need to go get tested. 6 of them were positive, 6 of them were negative, and the others were straight. So they confronted me in the house, and I tested positive in 1991. And I was seeing this guy, and I called him up, and I was crying, and I told him what happened, and he said, don't worry, babe, I won't leave you. I got all excited. Oh, does that mean you're leaving her and going to move in with me? And he said, no, that doesn't mean that at all. It means we'll just keep doing things the way we're doing it. And it's funny when I heard Jacqueline say, and I said to my sponsee, I think Steve is seeing somebody else. And my sponsee looked at me like they do, and when you're really crazy. And Ted, he's married. Of course he's seeing someone else. I said, oh, I mean somebody besides that. I think he's seeing another guy. And that really bothered me. So Steve passed away 2 months later from AIDS. And he never told me that. And I called his mother and asked, I didn't know it was his mother. I called his work, and a woman answered the phone, and I asked to speak to Steve. And she said, I'm sorry, didn't you know that Steve passed away? And I said, what happened? And she said, he had AIDS. And I said, who am I speaking with? And she said, this is his mother. He worked in a family business. And I was devastated. But it came back to me. My sponsor had said, you can do whatever you want as long as you're willing to pay the consequences. And I was thinking, I didn't think they would be that bad. I didn't think the consequences would be that bad. And I went into a huge depression where Steve got me through that, and my sponsees carried me through that. I remember Steve, I was angry. I had worked the steps, and I knew the book backwards and forwards, and I had stayed sober on a lot of activity, but I had not formed a relationship with God. And so that's what happened for me. I was forced into looking at myself a little closer, and I became angry, and AA wasn't working for me, and I didn't get what I wanted. I wasn't wresting satisfaction and happiness out of the world. I had something serious happen to me, and I went to meetings, and people were talking about their lives, and I was disinterested. I started sitting in the back, started making fun of people again. I went to a meeting with Steve. I looked at the speaker. I said, I don't want to hear him. And Steve said, okay, we'll go to another meeting. We went to another meeting. I said, I don't like the format. And we went to the third meeting, and my sponsee Steve said, we're not going to another meeting. Deal with it. And so I saw that Bill talks about self-pity oozing from every pore. That's where I was. I was just sitting in self-pity. I got back on the firing line and started sponsoring, and it was just a really difficult time for me, but I went to SLAA meetings. I really just had to really look at this, and I'll just talk about this spiritual adventure I went on. I knew that my spirituality I had lacked on step 11, and I had HIV at this time. I joined this HIV support group, and they were going on a retreat, to a Zen retreat down in Los Angeles, and I signed up for it because I was looking for something, and on the way up to the Zen retreat down in the San Jacinto Mountains, I think it is, the guy who had arranged the whole thing, he said, "Oh, Ted, by the way, it's a 3-day silent retreat." Oh, my God. I don't know anybody that talks as much as I do. And I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he goes, "Because you wouldn't come. But it's going to be a silent retreat, so we just want you to relax. Don't get freaked out." I was freaking out. I was, pull over. I need some chocolate chip cookies and Diet Coke. And I was afraid that they were going to have vegetarian food only and no coffee. And he assured me, because we were beginners, that they were going to allow us to have some coffee so we wouldn't have withdrawals. But what I did, I got 5 or 6 of the gay guys, and I took them up into my cabin, and we talked. We talked all night, and we had a party with chocolate chip cookies and Diet Coke. And I was like 9 years sober and acting really badly. And the Zen master at that retreat called me aside, and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." He had a session with each of the participants, and he said, he talked about my behavior. And I said, "Well, you said, be childlike." So that's what I'm doing. And he said, "Not really. You're acting childish." He said, "There's a huge difference between being childish and childlike. And you're a very childish person." Man, I was so upset. And then he said something that my sponsor had been saying to me for 9 years. "You get out of it what you put into it. Why don't you just participate and try?" My sponsor had been saying that about AA the whole time I've been in it. You get out of it what you put into it. Why don't you just try and do a little bit better? And that was amazing to me. I went back 6 months later and did that retreat in the right way. Didn't try to sabotage it and didn't try to. I was really looking for some spirituality. I joined an S&M spirituality club. And really, I was searching. I didn't know they had such a thing. But somebody in AA said they knew about it and gave me all the literature. And I explored that for a minute. I went into Wicca. I started I joined a coven of AAs. 7 guys in AA that were in a coven, and we did AA meetings at my house, and we painted the floor green with a gold circle and did ritual in AA. And we tried to start a group in San Francisco called Pagans in AA, and we had one meeting. We couldn't get along, and we fought so much it never happened. We never had a second meeting. And what I realized, it's really hard to create your own religion, and because somebody's got to be the leader, and everybody wants to do that. So at that time, I signed up with another AA guy to do a 3-year Bible study, and that was an amazing thing. I had always had contempt prior to investigation about the Bible and Christianity, and so I went into this Bible study, and I did it for 3 years. It was an amazing thing, and right at the end of that 3 years, I went to the Hawaii conference, the state Hawaii conference, and Sister B was speaking. And I still had a bit of anger towards the church, and I was 17 years sober, and I saw that Sister B was on the program, and she was going to be the main speaker. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to go here as none speak, and I was going on and on about it. But at the last minute, my sponsor would always say, just show up. Just put everything aside and show up. So I went into that meeting, and Sister B was up there, and she said, "I just want to start off and acknowledge all the people that had trouble getting in here tonight because of their past. It's like she was talking right to me, and I was like amazed. I was sitting in the very back near the door. Normally I would be up front, but I was sitting in the back because if she said anything I didn't like, I was leaving. And so she said, I really want to congratulate you for making it into the room tonight when you saw that Sister B was speaking. And then she said, I have one other thing to say to you. I didn't do it to you. And then she said, but I will apologize for all the abuse and harm done by the women in my profession to anybody that might be out there listening. And I felt what I've heard about in Alcoholics Anonymous, drop the rock, just the problems that you may think you have, the resentments. I just felt like I had a healing over that stuff, that old resentments that I'd carried for so many years. So as a result of, my sponsor always said, go to meetings that are easy to get to, the ones right on the block, go to the ones that are difficult to get to, and go to the ones that are impossible to get to. And this is in that impossible category, because it's just amazing that I could have the courage and confidence of my convictions to share what God has done for me through this program. But it says, bear witness to those you would help of God's power, love, and way of life. And that's what gives me courage every day, surrendering my will over to God and knowing that the reason that I do this and the reason that you're all here tonight is because you want to be in God's grace. And so this has been an amazing thing, and I've loved Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time. And about 14 years ago, my older sister called me up, and I had just been diagnosed with AIDS in 1997, and the 2000 conference was coming up in Minneapolis, the international conference, and I was really praying that I would stay alive. They told me to get my affairs in business. They put me on disability. I was very sick, and I was praying to God, once again bargaining, to just keep me alive until 2000. I want to go to the international. I'd been to San Diego, and I'd been to Seattle, and I wanted to do one more international. I also gathered all my sponsees together and said, I'm dying. Yeah. I want you all to get another sponsor. And then I was resentful when two of them did. It was just a scene I was playing, and they took it seriously. So what happened right before, a year before that Minneapolis conference, my older sister called me, and I have 9 siblings, and I was so thrilled. She called me and said, I'm an alcoholic. I'm going to Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been in Al-Anon for 20 years, and I'm going to AA. And what an odd thing. I've been going to Alcoholics Anonymous for 20 years, and I'm going to Al-Anon. I mean, the rings are slow learners. They're just really slow. So my sister met me at Minneapolis, and to have a sibling in the 50,000 conference, not Seattle, at Minneapolis, and saying the third step prayer, it was amazing. So that was one of the highlights of my sobriety up to that point. I called my sponsor when I was going on disability, and I was really upset about it. I'd worked really hard. I had finally gotten to a place in my career as a physical rehab nurse that I really valued my position and the way I worked in the unit. I got respect from my peers, and people had stopped, my supervisors had stopped writing me up for arguing with people, and it went from people who were asking to change the shift so they wouldn't have to work with me, and after millions of inventories, people were asking to work with me, and I had really gotten to a place where I was comfortable with that job, and then I went on disability, and I called my sponsor, and my sponsor's attitude always is, Ted, it's a seemingly bad leading to the good. Remember, you've given your will and your life over to God, and that's what it's about. God has a plan for you. And when you're not really ready to hear it, that can be really annoying. And so I was like, oh, really? I said, this time I think it's a little bad. And he said, nope, God has a plan for you. Just think of the opportunities to sponsor and go to more meetings. I'm like, I can't sponsor anymore. I can't go to any more meetings. There's no time in my schedule. He said, you're not working. You can do this. And that just opened up, between bouts of dealing with the medications and the health issues, I threw myself more actively into Alcoholics Anonymous. And the gifts have been immense. 3 years ago, my sister called me, and this sister here, the youngest of the 9, and she was crying, and her partnership had just broken up. And she said, she was crying and seriously upset. And she said, I'm an alcoholic. I have to go to AA. Inside, I'm thinking, yay. But what I said was, we'll get through this. It'll be all right. Because that's what you guys have told me through all my trials and tribulations and all my self-will run riot and all my superior, arrogant attitudes, all those things that I wrestle with. It'll be all right. We'll get through it. And that is the biggest blessing I can say that I've received is the love of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was defiant and arrogant and rebellious and didn't want it, it was still there for me. And it just waiting for me to receive it. So I don't know if I've expressed how much I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been a gift. It is a huge honor to be able to carry the message to a group like this that's so diverse and people from all over and such a amazing amount of love expressed in the workshops, and it's just been fantastic. I hope that you all get as much out of it as I have, and thank you very much for my sobriety.